The year was 2847, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for nearly 300 years. In all that time, they had never fired a weapon in anger. They had never started a war. They had never even threatened another species. The galaxy thought they understood humans. They were wrong. Ambassador Katie Monroe stood in the Great Hall of Desert Prime, surrounded by beings from a dozen different worlds. The ceiling rose so high above her that clouds sometimes formed near the top. The walls were made of living crystal that sang softly when the wind blew through the chamber. It was beautiful, but Katie had stopped noticing years ago. She was too busy keeping the galaxy from tearing itself apart. "The Vectari Empire demands compensation," growled the tall, scaled creature to her left. His name was impossible for human tongues to pronounce, so Katie called him Victor in her head. "The Druin Collective destroyed 3 of our mining stations." "The stations were in disputed territory," hissed the Druin representative, a creature that looked like a spider made of smoke and anger. "We had every right to remove them." Katie stepped between them, her small human form dwarfed by both aliens. "Gentlemen," she said calmly, "perhaps we can find a solution that doesn't involve more destruction." This was her life. Every day, she stood between species that wanted to kill each other and somehow convinced them to talk instead. The galaxy was a violent place. Every species except humanity seemed to solve their problems with weapons and war. The Vectari had conquered 12 worlds. The Druin had enslaved entire civilizations. Even the peaceful-looking Thesari, who hosted the council, had fought brutal wars in their past. Only humans were different. Only humans chose words over weapons. High Arbiter Vexthel watched from his elevated platform at the center of the chamber. He was an insectoid creature, 7 feet tall, with mandibles that clicked when he was amused. He was amused often when watching humans. To him, they were a fascinating puzzle. A species that had somehow reached the stars without the warrior spirit that drove every other civilization. "The human speaks wisely," Vexthel announced, his voice echoing through the hall. "We will form a committee to study the border dispute. Ambassador Monroe will lead the negotiations." Katie nodded politely, but inside she felt tired. Always negotiations. Always committees. Sometimes she wondered what it would feel like to simply say no. To tell these violent species that enough was enough. But that wasn't the human way. Not anymore. 12,000 light years away, on a small farm in New Mexico, a 78-year-old man named Ben Cortez pulled weeds from his garden. The sun was warm on his back. The soil was cool in his hands. It was peaceful, and peace was something Ben had learned to treasure. He had been an admiral once. That felt like another lifetime now. The border skirmishes of 2801 were the last time humanity had used its military might. Ben had commanded a fleet of 30 ships against pirates who had kidnapped human colonists. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the pirates were gone and the colonists were safe. Ben had received medals and honors. He had also received nightmares that took decades to fade. Humanity had decided long ago that war was not worth the cost. Not because they were weak, not because they couldn't fight, but because they remembered too well what happened when they did. Ben's phone buzzed. It was a message from his granddaughter, Nina. She was a lieutenant aboard the diplomatic vessel Horizon's Edge, ferrying council delegates between worlds. The message was short. "Miss you, Grandpa. Wish humans did something more exciting than talk." Ben smiled sadly. Nina was young. She didn't understand. She had grown up in a galaxy where humans were known as peacemakers and merchants. She had never seen what humans could become when pushed too far. Back on Nesser Prime, the council session ended and the delegates filed out. Vexthel remained behind, speaking quietly with his advisors. They were all insectoids like him, their bodies clicking and buzzing as they communicated. The humans grow weaker with each generation, one advisor observed. Their warships sit unused. Their soldiers become farmers. They are no longer a species to be considered. Vex's mandibles clicked in agreement. They have forgotten what they are. In 10 more generations, they will be servants to stronger races. It is the natural order. Should we be concerned about their influence in the council? Another advisor asked. Vextel made a sound that passed for laughter among his kind. Concerned? About a species that refuses to fight? No. Let them negotiate and mediate. It keeps them busy and keeps them harmless. The real power will always belong to those willing to use force. He had no way of knowing how wrong he was. On Earth, in a massive underground facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Grace Holloway walked through corridors that officially didn't exist. She was 45 years old, with gray streaking her dark hair and steel in her eyes. On paper, she commanded a ceremonial defense force. The truth was very different. The facility stretched for miles in every direction. Thousands of people worked here in perfect secrecy. They maintained ships that the galaxy thought were obsolete. They trained soldiers that the galaxy thought didn't exist. They kept humanity's true strength hidden, waiting for a day they hoped would never come. Grace stopped at a viewing window. Beyond the glass, rows of warships sat in silent darkness. The Silent Thunder, the Iron Promise, the Last Resort. Names that meant nothing to the galaxy, but everything to the people who served aboard them. Commander Derek Santos joined her at the window. To the outside world, he was a shipping logistics coordinator. In reality, he had spent 20 years running combat simulations and keeping human tactical knowledge sharp. Any word from the council? He asked. Same as always, Grace replied. The Victarian Druin are threatening each other. Our ambassador is trying to keep them from starting another war. And if she fails? Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then we remind the galaxy why we chose peace in the first place. Derek nodded slowly. He understood. Everyone in this facility understood. Humanity hadn't abandoned war because they were weak or afraid. They had abandoned it because they knew, better than any species in the galaxy, just how terrible they could be. They had fought each other for thousands of years. They had invented weapons that could crack planets and poison stars. They had looked into the abyss of their own nature and decided to step back, but the weapons were still there. The knowledge was still there. The wolves were only sleeping dot, and somewhere in the darkness of space, a Druin warlord was about to make the worst mistake in galactic history. The colony world of New Cascadia was a beautiful place. It had blue oceans, green forests, and mountains that touched the clouds. 4 million humans called it home. They were farmers and scientists, teachers and children. They had never known war. They had never needed to. Dr. Lisa Park worked at the planet's main research station, studying alien plant life. She was 32 years old, with curious eyes and dirt permanently under her fingernails. Her work was peaceful and slow, exactly how she liked it. On the morning, everything changed. She was examining a flower that only bloomed once every 7 years. The first warning came at 6:47 a.m. local time. Alarms screamed across every city on the planet. People looked up at the sky and saw shapes emerging from the clouds. Ships. Hundreds of them. They were dark and angular, built for war, and they carried the symbol of the Druin Collective. Warlord Kethva stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human colony grow larger on his view screen. It was enormous, even by Druin standards, a nightmare of smoke and shadow and hunger. For decades, he had watched humanity refuse to fight. He had watched them talk and negotiate and compromise. He had come to believe they were incapable of resistance. Begin the attack, he commanded. Destroy their orbital defenses. Prepare ground forces for occupation. "What are our terms, warlord?" his second-in-command asked. Kethvas made a sound like grinding metal. "Terms? There are no terms. The humans will serve us in the mines of Druun Prime. Every single one of them. This world belongs to the collective now." The Druun fleet opened fire. New Cascadia's orbital defense platforms, maintained but never truly tested, fell within 3 hours. They were designed to stop pirates and small raids, not a full military invasion. The colonists below could only watch as their sky filled with fire and falling debris. On Earth, President Daniel Reyes received the news in the middle of the night. He was a calm man, known for his steady hands and careful thinking. But when he saw the footage from New Cascadia, when he saw Drime soldiers dragging human families from their homes, his hands began to shake. He called an emergency meeting of the Global Defense Council. 12 people gathered in a room deep beneath the capital city. They were generals and admirals, scientists and strategists. Most of them had spent their entire careers hoping they would never have to use their training. "The Druun have demanded unconditional surrender," an aide reported. "They want the entire colonial population for slave labor." "What does the Galactic Council say?" Reyes asked. The aide hesitated. "High Arbiter Vexthil has ruled that the Druun are within their rights under the Conquest Protocols. He suggests we negotiate terms of surrender to minimize casualties." The room fell silent. General Marcus Webb, a weathered man of 60 with scars on his hands from wars most people had forgotten, slowly stood up. "With respect, Mr. President," he said quietly, "I don't think we're going to do that." Reyes looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Wake up the wolves." Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Grace Holloway received authorization codes that hadn't been transmitted in 46 years. Red lights began flashing in corridors that had known only darkness and patience. Thousands of men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment felt their hearts begin to race. Grace opened a channel to every hidden facility on Earth. Her voice was steady. "All units, this is Admiral Holloway. Authorization code Omega-7. We are no longer sleeping. Repeat, we are no longer sleeping. Report to battle stations." In New Mexico, Ben Cortez was watching the news when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a name he hadn't seen in years, Marcus Webb. "Ben," Marcus said, his voice heavy with something that might have been fear or might have been anticipation. "They attacked New Cascadia. 4 million people. They're taking them as slaves." Ben closed his eyes. He thought of his granddaughter Nina somewhere out in space. He thought of his garden and his peaceful retirement. He thought of all the years humanity had spent trying to be better than their nature. "What do you need?" he asked. "We need you to remember who we were." Ben opened his eyes. "I never forgot." On Thesser Prime, Ambassador Katie Monroe burst into the council chamber. The session wasn't scheduled to begin for hours, but she didn't care. She walked straight to the center of the room, her small human form radiating a fury that made larger beings step back. "High Arbiter," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the great hall. "The Druun are slaughtering my people. They are taking our children as slaves. And you ruled that this is acceptable?" Vexthil's mandibles clicked nervously. He had never seen a human look like this before. There was something in Katie's eyes that he didn't recognize, something that made ancient instincts in his brain scream warnings. "The conquest protocols are clear," he said, trying to sound confident. "The species that cannot defend its territory forfeits its right to that territory. This is galactic law." "Galactic law," Katie repeated softly. "I see." She turned and walked toward the exit. Vexthil felt a strange relief wash over him. The human was leaving. The matter was closed. "Ambassador Monroe," he called out, his confidence returning. "Where are you going?" Katie stopped at the door. She turned her head just enough to look at him over her shoulder. When she spoke, her voice was calm and cold and absolutely terrifying. I'm going to watch. Watch what? I'm going to watch you learn why humanity chose peace. She left. Vexthel told himself he wasn't afraid. He told himself that humans were weak, that they had forgotten how to fight, that they would surrender and accept their losses like the passive creatures they had become. He was still telling himself that, when the reports started coming in, human ships were emerging from hyperspace. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. They came from hidden bases scattered across human territory, ships that the galaxy had thought were rust and relics. They moved in perfect formation, silent and deadly, converging on a single point in space. New CADIA. Commander Derek Santos sat in the cockpit of his fighter, part of a squadron of 500, watching the planet grow larger ahead of them. The drone fleet was visible now, dark shapes against the blue and green of the colony world. All pilots, Admiral Holloway's voice came through the comm. Weapons free. Show them what happens when you touch our people. Derek smiled grimly. For 20 years, he had pretended to be a logistics coordinator. For 20 years, he had trained in secret and waited in shadow. Now, finally, it was time. You heard the Admiral, he said to his squadron. Let's remind the galaxy who we are. The wolves had awakened, and they were hungry. Fear spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On 100 worlds, beings who had never thought twice about humanity now found themselves unable to think about anything else. The 17-minute war played on every view screen, analyzed by every military commander, discussed in every government hall. And everywhere, the same question was asked. What else don't we know about humans? High Arbiter Vexthel had not slept in 4 days. His private chambers, once a place of comfort and power, now felt like a cage. Armed guards stood at every entrance. Advisors came and went with reports that grew more terrifying by the hour. The insectoid leader, who had once mocked humanity, now jumped at shadows. Show me the historical analysis, he demanded. A holographic display filled the room. It showed Earth across thousands of years, a timeline of human civilization. Wars upon wars upon wars. Empires rising and falling. Weapons evolving from rocks and sticks to things that could crack planets. The Council's Xenohistorians had dismissed this history as primitive, the growing pains of a young species. Now they saw it for what it truly was. Practice. Thalassa, a Vectari scholar with scales the color of old copper, presented the findings. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Humans did not evolve as prey animals, she explained. They evolved as persistence hunters. Their ancestors would chase prey for days, never stopping, never tiring, until the hunted creature simply collapsed from exhaustion. They are not built for quick bursts of violence like most species. They are built for endless, relentless, unstoppable pursuit. Vexthel's mandibles clicked rapidly, but they stopped fighting. They became peaceful. No. Thalassa pulled up more data. They did not become peaceful. They chose to be peaceful. There is a difference. They fought themselves for so long, developed weapons so terrible that they realized they would destroy themselves if they continued. So they stopped, not because they couldn't fight anymore, but because they were too good at it. The display showed images that made Vexthel's blood run cold. Mushroom clouds rising over cities. Biological weapons that could kill billions. Machines designed for nothing but death on an industrial scale. And all of it created by humans fighting other humans. They did this to their own kind, an advisor whispered. For thousands of years, Thalassa confirmed. Until they decided to stop. And now we have reminded them what they are capable of. On Thesser Prime, Ambassador Katie Monroe returned to the council chamber. The Great Hall felt different now. Before, The other delegates had ignored her or looked at her with amusement. Now they watched her with something close to terror. When she walked, beings twice her size stepped aside to let her pass. She stood at the center of the chamber and delivered humanity's terms. Her voice was calm and professional, but everyone could hear the steel beneath the words. The Druin Collective will pay full reparations for the attack on New Cascadia. They will release every slave taken in previous conquests, regardless of species. They will submit to complete demilitarization. Any violation will be met with immediate response. No one argued. No one questioned. The Druin representative, a new one since Kethvis had died, simply nodded and accepted. But Katie wasn't finished. From this point forward, any species that attacks human interests will face the same consequences as the Druin. We do not seek war. We do not want war. But we will not be victims. We will not watch our children taken as slaves while this council offers us condolences and suggestions of surrender. She looked directly at Vexthal. The High Arbiter couldn't meet her eyes. Do we understand each other? Yes, Ambassador. Vexthal managed to say, we understand. But not everyone in the galaxy was ready to accept humanity's new position. In the Victari Empire, the largest military power in the Council, Emperor Kethmer watched the same reports with very different eyes. He was old and cunning, a warrior who had conquered 6 systems in his youth. He did not feel fear when he looked at humanity's victory. He felt opportunity. They revealed themselves too soon, he told his war council. Yes, they are powerful, but they are also few. One species against the galaxy. If we strike now, while they are still waking up, we can end this threat forever. His advisors exchanged nervous glances. The Druin had 200 ships, one pointed out. The humans destroyed them in 17 minutes. The Druin were fools, Kethmer snapped. They attacked alone, without preparation, without understanding their enemy. We will not make the same mistake. We will build a coalition. Every species that fears humanity's rise will join us. Together, we will outnumber them 100 to 1. The Emperor began reaching out to other worlds. He spoke of security and stability, of preventing one species from dominating the galaxy. He found many willing listeners. The Druin survivors, eager for revenge. The Dazari, worried about losing their position of neutrality. Dozens of smaller species who saw in humanity's awakening the end of everything they knew. Within weeks, a coalition began to form. Ships gathered at secret locations. Plans were drawn up. An armada that would dwarf anything the galaxy had ever seen took shape in the darkness between stars. Lieutenant Nia Cortez discovered it first. She had been transferred from diplomatic duty to reconnaissance, using the horizon's edge to patrol the edges of human space. Her scanners picked up unusual energy signatures near a dead star 300 light-years from Earth. What she found made her blood freeze. Thousands of ships. Victari, Druin, Dazari, and a dozen other species she barely recognized. All of them armed for war. All of them pointed toward human territory. She transmitted her findings immediately and ran for home. On Earth, President Daniel Reyes received the intelligence in his secure bunker beneath the capital. Admiral Grace Holloway stood beside him, her face grim. General Marcus Webb studied the tactical display with experienced eyes. And Ben Cortez, called back from retirement once again, sat quietly in the corner, thinking. They're going to hit us with everything they have, Holloway said. We can't fight a coalition that size. Not defensively. Then, we don't fight defensively, Ben spoke up. Everyone turned to look at the old man. Humanity didn't survive our own wars by waiting for our enemies to come to us. We survived by being smarter, faster, and more willing to do what needed to be done. Reyes nodded slowly. What do you recommend? Ben stood and walked to the tactical display. He began pointing out positions, movements, strategies that he had learned in wars most of these people had never heard of. We hit them before they're ready. We break their coalition before it can form properly. We make them so afraid that they surrender before the real war even begins. And if they don't surrender? Holloway asked. Ben's eyes were hard. Then we show them why our ancestors chose peace. We show them the full horror of human warfare. And we make sure they never threaten us again. The room was silent. Then Reyes spoke. Do it. The wolves were not just awake now. They were hunting. Warlord Kethvis was enjoying himself. His troops had secured 3 major cities on New Cascadia. Thousands of humans were already being loaded onto transport ships, their eyes empty with shock and despair. Soon they would learn their place in the natural order of things. Soon they would serve the Druun collective until their bodies broke and their spirits died. Then his tactical officer made a sound of confusion. Warlord, we have contacts emerging from hyperspace. Kethvis didn't bother looking up from his reports. How many? 12, 20? Let them come. They will watch their people taken and know that resistance is pointless. Warlord. The officer's voice was strange. Frightened. I count 400 warships. Now Kethvis looked up. He moved to the view screen and felt something he had never felt before in his long career of conquest. He felt cold. The human fleet filled the space before him. Ship after ship after ship, emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. They moved like they were parts of a single organism, spreading out to surround the drone forces with practiced precision. These were not merchant vessels converted for defense. These were not ceremonial relics. These were weapons of war built by a species that had spent millennia learning how to kill. All ships, Kethvis commanded, trying to keep his voice steady. Battle formation. Prepare to engage. But there was no time. The human attack began before the Druun could finish forming their lines. Admiral Grace Holloway sat in her command chair aboard the dreadnought Silent Thunder, watching the battle unfold on her tactical display. Her voice was calm when she gave orders, almost gentle. She had waited her entire career for this moment. She felt no joy in it, only grim necessity. Fighter squadrons, eliminate their command ships. Cruiser groups, target their engines. I want them trapped before they know what's happening. Commander Derek Santos led the first wave. His squadron dove through enemy fire like hawks through a storm, their movements so fast and coordinated that the Druun gunners couldn't track them. In the first 3 minutes, they destroyed the enemy's communication array, their command ship, and their flagship's main engines. Kethvis screamed orders that no one could hear. His fleet was dying around him. Ships that had conquered a dozen worlds exploded like paper lanterns in a hurricane. The humans didn't fight like any enemy he had ever faced. They didn't form neat lines and exchange volleys. They struck from every direction at once, overwhelming, relentless, impossible to predict. How? He demanded of the darkness around him. How are they doing this? He would never get an answer. A human cruiser appeared directly in front of his crippled flagship, and its gun spoke once. Kethvis had just enough time to feel fear before the universe went white. On the surface of New Cascadia, the liberation had already begun. Marine Captain Jenna Cole dropped from orbit with 10,000 soldiers, their landing pods falling like rain across the occupied cities. She was 34 years old, built like a weapon, with eyes that had seen training simulations that would drive most beings mad. Remember your training, she told her troops as they descended. Fast and clean. Every civilian is priority 1. The enemy is priority 0. The Druun ground forces had no idea what hit them. Human soldiers moved through the streets like ghosts, appearing from nowhere, striking with perfect accuracy, vanishing before the enemy could respond. They had trained for this their entire lives. They had practiced urban combat, hostage rescue, and rapid assault until it was as natural as breathing. In 3 hours, every occupied city was free. In 4 hours, every Druan soldier on the planet was dead or captured. The colonists emerged from their hiding places, blinking in the sunlight, unable to believe what had happened. Dr. Lisa Park was among them. She had spent the occupation hiding in a basement with 40 other people, certain that they would all be taken away to die in alien mines. Now she stood in the street and watched human soldiers walk past, their faces calm and professional. "Thank you," she whispered to a passing Marine. The soldier paused. He was young, barely 20, but his eyes were old. "Don't thank us, ma'am. This is what we're for." High above the planet, the battle was already over. The entire Druan invasion force, nearly 200 ships, had been destroyed or disabled in 17 minutes. It would go down in galactic history as the 17-minute war. The war seemed too grand a word for what had been, in truth. A very brief lesson. Admiral Holloway ordered her officer to open a channel to the Galactic Council. She wanted them to see this. She wanted them to understand. This is Admiral Grace Holloway of the Earth Defense Force, broadcasting to all Council worlds. The Druan attack on New Cascadia has been neutralized. Warlord Kethvis is dead. All human civilians are safe. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder than steel. "Let me be clear. We did not want this. For 300 years, we chose peace. We chose to solve problems with words instead of weapons. We chose to be what we hoped all species could become. But you mistook our choice for weakness. You thought we had forgotten what we are." On Desser Prime, every delegate in the council chamber stood frozen before their view screens. Vexta's mandibles hung open, unable to make a sound. The Vectari ambassador was trembling. Even the Thesari, ancient beings who had seen civilizations rise and fall, looked shaken. "We remember," Holloway continued. "We remember every war we ever fought, every weapon we ever built, every horror we ever inflicted on ourselves. We chose peace because we knew the alternative. And now you know it too." The channel closed. Silence filled the council chamber. No one moved. No one spoke. For the first time in centuries, the elder races of the galaxy felt something they had almost forgotten. They felt small. On Earth, Ben Cortez watched the broadcast with tears in his eyes. He had hoped humanity would never need to wake up again. He had hoped the wolves could sleep forever. But he also felt something else beneath the sorrow. Something that had been buried for so long, he barely recognized it. Pride. His phone buzzed. A message from Nina. "Grandpa, I understand now. I understand everything." Ben wiped his eyes and typed back, "Come home soon. We have a lot to talk about." The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. The peaceful species, the harmless negotiators, the weak and passive humans had shown their true face. And it was the face of something ancient and terrible and absolutely unstoppable. The wolves were awake, and they were not going back to sleep. The Coalition War lasted 6 months. In that time, the galaxy learned things about humanity that would haunt them for generations. They learned that humans did not fight for territory or resources or glory. They fought for each other. And there was nothing in the universe more dangerous than a human protecting someone they loved. Admiral Grace Holloway led the first strike against the Coalition fleet at the Crimson Nebula. The enemy had gathered 12,000 ships, the largest armada in galactic history. They expected humans to cower before such numbers. They expected negotiations, surrender, or at worst a desperate defensive stand. Instead, the humans attacked. The Battle of the Crimson Nebula became legend. Human ships dove into the heart of the enemy formation, ignoring all conventional tactics. They used the nebula's radiation to hide their movements. They struck from impossible angles. They did things that no sane military commander would ever attempt. Commander Derek Santos led a squadron of 50 fighters directly at the coalition flagship. Enemy gunners couldn't track targets moving so fast, so unpredictably. Derek's squadron destroyed the flagship's engines, its weapons, and its bridge in 4 minutes. When his own ship was crippled by enemy fire, he aimed it at the nearest coalition cruiser and ejected at the last possible second. He survived. He always survived. Humans were like that. On a dozen worlds, human ground forces proved even more terrifying. General Marcus Webb commanded the planetary campaigns with a philosophy the aliens couldn't comprehend. Human soldiers never left their wounded behind, never abandoned their positions, never stopped fighting until every last comrade was safe or avenged. Marine Captain Jenna Cole earned a reputation that spread across coalition space like a plague. She liberated 3 occupied worlds in 3 weeks, her troops moving through enemy lines like water through sand. Vectari generals who had conquered star systems resigned rather than face her. They said she couldn't be killed. They said she wasn't human at all, but something older and darker that wore human skin. She was just a woman from a small town in Ohio who had trained her whole life to protect people. But the aliens didn't understand that. They couldn't understand dedication that ran deeper than fear or self-preservation. Dr. Lisa Park, rescued from New Cascadia, joined the war effort in her own way. She studied captured coalition weapons and found weaknesses that turned the tide of multiple engagements. A scientist who had once grown flowers now helped design countermeasures that saved thousands of human lives. But it was the small moments that broke the coalition's will to fight on. The frozen moon of the Tsar's 7th world. A human medic refused to leave a wounded Thessari civilian behind, even though saving her meant crossing through enemy fire. The Thessari had joined the coalition out of fear. When their people saw humans dying to save aliens, many began to question why they were fighting at all. On a Vectari colony, human soldiers shared their rations with starving enemy prisoners. The Vectari expected torture and execution. Instead, they received food and medical care and the chance to go home. Word spread through the coalition ranks. Humans didn't fight like conquerors. They fought like protectors. One by one, species began to surrender. The Thessari were first, their government collapsing under pressure from their own citizens who no longer wanted to fight beings who had shown them mercy. The smaller species followed, their fleets disappearing from the coalition armada like leaves falling from a dying tree. Emperor Kethmer refused to give up. He rallied what remained of his forces for a final stand at the Vectari homeworld. 2,300 ships against humanity's battered but unbroken fleet. Admiral Holloway gave the order to attack. But this time, something different happened. Before the human fleet could reach the Vectari defenses, a transmission came from the enemy flagship. It wasn't Kethmar. It was his own officers, announcing that the Emperor had been removed from power. They were surrendering unconditionally. They were begging for peace. The war was over. In the aftermath, the Galactic Council was dissolved. Its structure had allowed the strong to prey upon the weak, and created the conditions for endless cycles of conquest and revenge. Something new had to take its place. Katie Monroe was elected as the first speaker of the Allied worlds. She stood in a new chamber built on the ruins of the old council hall and addressed delegates from every surviving civilization. Behind her, human soldiers stood guard, not as conquerors, but as protectors. "We didn't want this," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the galaxy. "For 300 years, we chose peace. We chose to believe that all species could learn to solve their problems without violence. We still believe that. But we also learned something important. Peace without strength is just surrender. And we will never surrender again." She paused, letting her words sink in. From this day forward, the Allied worlds will protect the weak. We will punish aggression. We will give every species the chance to grow and flourish without fear of conquest. And we will never forget the lessons that brought us here. Neither should you. High Arbiter Vexthil, stripped of power and exiled to a distant moon, wrote his memoirs in the years that followed. They became required reading for every diplomat and military officer in the galaxy. The final line was quoted in history books for centuries to come. We thought they were sheep who had forgotten how to bite. We never imagined they were wolves who had chosen to sleep. Ben Cortez returned to his garden in New Mexico. But now, children came to visit from 100 worlds. Human children and alien children, all curious about the old man who had helped humanity remember its teeth. He told them stories, showed them how to grow tomatoes, and taught them the most important lesson he knew. Being strong doesn't mean you have to hurt people, he would say. That means you can choose not to. The choice is what matters. His granddaughter Nina commanded her own ship now, part of the peacekeeping fleet that patrolled the Allied worlds. She visited when she could, bringing seeds from distant planets for his garden. Do you think we'll ever have to fight again? She asked him once. Ben looked up at the stars, remembering all the wars he had seen and all the peace he had helped build. Maybe, he admitted. But the galaxy knows what happens if they push us. That's enough. That's always been enough. Humanity had embraced war one final time. They had shown the galaxy their true nature, the predator that slept behind peaceful eyes. And then, with the same discipline and determination, they had put the wolves back to sleep. But everyone knew the wolves were still there, waiting, watching, ready. And no one in the galaxy would ever forget it.